I am Dean Bushmiller with Expanding Security, and this is Host Access Control Systems and Software. Let's get started. For host-based access control, we have to talk about the big chunk of stuff that we're not going to talk about right now, but is in a whole bunch of other videos. So if we look at the standards for host access controls, what are they? Well, it's identity management. That's user accounts and auditing account actions, right? It's authentication, where we verify the user's identity. Maybe we use multi-factor authentication, but we provide the authentication processes for them. We do the authorization, which is we control the access rights, we set the permissions, we limit network access through things like VPNs. We also audit. We review by producing the records, and we turn those record functions on, and we review those audit records within a centralized location. For cryptography, we do that encryption at the organization level, and we do organizational data. So we're going to do file encryption. We may be doing database encryption, but then after that, we've got to manage those keys. And then we have firewalls that we're going to do for host access control, and that's going to filter the network traffic and protect network traffic boundaries. Now, those are the standards. Those are the things that you should know. There's a recording on every single one of those things, so please go look at those. We're going to drill a little bit deeper into the place that most people don't talk about, and that's the endpoint detection response. That's the EDR. Okay, what does the EDR do? Well, it monitors endpoints. It collects the telemetry data and intercepts functions that may be being called by our adversaries, or maybe end users are trying to do something that they shouldn't. It detects threats. So it's endpoints. It detects what? Analyzing the behavior, comparing signatures, processing indicators of compromise to a centralized location, and correlating those events to a centralized location so that we can see an attacker moving throughout our organization. So that's the detection. What's the response? The response is isolating that endpoint, saying, hey, you've been bad. We're going to put you over here. We're going to terminate the process that was created by that malware. We're going to quarantine files or quarantine you. We're going to restore the systems, which I, as an incident responder, I got some problems with that one. We'll talk about that one later on. And then we have to alert personnel. Now, if there are vulnerabilities on the box, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to deploy patches. That's how you normally do that, through your patch management process. We may delete artifacts unless we've got a forensics issue that we run into, and we're going to reset passwords for that user and force them to get a new password so that the adversaries can't use the old one. Eventually, what we're going to do is we're going to harden those endpoints through a process that could be reducing the surfaces by taking away those pieces of software that are there, segment the networks themselves. Now, we won't do that with the EDR. We'll do it with a different tool. We'll close the ports on that individual workstation. We could do that, and we can enforce the policies. Now, that tells us what it does. Let's talk about that D in EDR here. What is it attacking? What are the attackers attacking, and what are we detecting in there? Now, this gets a little bit more complicated and a little bit more deep into the operating systems themselves. On a Windows machine, when attackers attack DLLs, they're going to intercept functions, okay? They're going to try to evade what are called the hooks. They're going to use syscalls, and they're going to remap files in a lot of cases, make them do something that they were never intended to do. At the driver level, we're going to try and filter the network so that the adversaries can't unload the filters. We're going to try and filter file systems so that they can't spoof requests. We're going to control boots so that they can't exploit vulnerabilities by rebooting and reinstalling software in some cases. On the scanner side of things, we're going to scan files for things like obfuscated strings and modified attributes. The actual, if you go into it and you right click on a file and you say properties, and then there's those boxes where you can go ahead and turn on read, turn off read, go ahead and make it, an archived bit or something like that. Those attributes, adversaries play around with that stuff. We're going to scan the memory, and we're going to look for them doing memory manipulation. For the interfaces that are on that box, we'll do scan scripts that will look for patch values. Like, adversaries can bypass the checks for a patch, and they can go right around those. Or we're going to look for them to set breakpoints where they can modify content. Next, callbacks. So there are notifying processes that happen all the time, but what the adversaries may do is spoof the identifiers for this or modify the parameters so that they either work or don't work. There are threads of execution that happen, and we want to notify when those threads, we want to be notified when those threads of execution happen. They may inject into those threads. We want to notify about the objects like duplicate handles and race routines that may happen within that. And lastly, what we're also looking for the adversaries to do in traces is for our trace events, they're going to try and modify our configurations, tamper with our sessions by stopping the traces or removing the providers. So those are the things that they detect for. Now, we need to take one step even further than that. And we've talked about EDR, and a lot of the things that are in EDR, vendors came along and said, oh no, that's not enough. We can't just do this on the endpoint, just on the host. We need to do it for the entire thing. So they invented XDR. And the EDR people said, but we're doing that stuff. Okay, but here's the distinction. And just to let you know, I think this is a lot of hype, but I also think a lot of the EDR vendors have caught up with this. So in theory, the difference is that EDR monitors endpoints and XDR integrates sources. EDR views things as hosts and XDR views things as systems. That's collections of hosts. EDR acts on a host and XDR acts on the infrastructure. But if you're connecting all these things together and you've got a unified structure, you should be okay. So that brings us to host access controls need to be unified. And that's really what ERD does for us. Where is AI in all this EDR? Well, first off, AI is making EDR much more important. A lot of organizations could get away without deploying EDR and looking at those fine details on those devices, but no more, because we've got to keep up. Okay, so now what we want to do is we're going to back up for a second and look at the construct of innovation and security. So somebody's going to say, hey, I want to build a new thing. They want to build AI or something like that, but I want to build a new thing, right? And so the reason why we do that is because it's a useful enterprise tool that's going to deliver on the mission in some new way. Great, we've never seen this before, let's go ahead and do that. At first, all they're concentrating on is making that thing work. You know, we don't worry about seatbelts in cars until we can actually make the car go, right? So there's not really any security at this point. Now, developers have been told that they should implement security at the very early stages. If you look at a lot of things that are going on, like OpenClaw, or what used to be called Moltbot, and before that was Claude something or other, Claude Bot. If you look at those things, they have no security on them. Or if you look at MCPs today, they have no security on them. Why? Because we're trying to make them work. Okay. Now, that also happens with product innovations. Now, security comes along. And what we say is, hey, look, from an enterprise standpoint, we need to gain visibility into the activities of that thing. How is thing activity breaking security requirements? So, So then what we do is we say, okay, let's define the signatures for the activity of thing. What does it use to generate I/O? What artifacts does it leave on the system? How does it change our system? How does the thing change our system? And what we do is we say, okay, now that we've collected that signature of activity, it usually starts off with a centralized signature evaluation. We pump everything through a firewall for the enterprise, something like that, okay? We're going to pass all this activity through what's called a reference monitor with signatures programmed into it. That's generally what we do. That's how an antivirus actually works. Now, this slows the production down for individuals in that distributed environment, because we have things like work from home where we don't have a big, huge pipe to and from that assessment tool. Or if we pass it over a VPN and work from home, we have a restricted pipe there that's being filtered. So we say, okay, well, that's not really working for us. We're going to do semi-decentralized signature evaluation. How are we going to do that? Well, we'll install an agent on the endpoint. We'll collect the activity in a sandbox locally. We'll submit that activity for review to the centralized authority. Now, if you were building AI and you were building AI agents today, like OpenClaw, those kinds of things, AI looks at controls that are in place and says, this is making me fail at my task. I'm going to route around this failure. Keep that in mind for a second. The sandboxing activity of your EDR looks like failure to the AI. And so if it can get around it, it will. Okay, now, in a fully decentralized signature evaluation, what happens is now we have host-based access controls. We don't have a centralized location. We have it on the individuals and we land it right there and we run it right there on that tool. And there's lots and lots of automation that happens at that point. Now we can do this for the individual or for the enterprise. When we go to the enterprise, we introduce something else in there, which is the reporting that has to happen. The AI agent may also look at that activity surrounding the core function or the core reporting of this particular enterprise and say, that looks like failure to me. I'm going to try and route around that particular failure. So we've got, generally what we've got is things, and then we introduce the security for those things. But now we want to look at this from an adversarial standpoint. Between the building and the deployment of security, between building the thing and putting the security on the thing, what happens? What do the attackers do? So attackers make new attacks all the time. The speed of creation takes some time, or took some time. But see, that's changed now because AI is removing that bottleneck for the attackers. So what takes time with the attackers? Well, first off, they have to learn a new thing. And then they have to identify the threats and vulnerabilities of that thing, the thing that we were building. But now AI helps skip all of that learning. We can say to the AI, go and look at how the thing fails to protect itself and make an attack for me. Now, we as attackers, if we're an attacker, we do lots and lots of trial and error. That's called friction points. That's going to be time. The beautiful thing about AI is it allows for automation of that whole trial and error process. And once I figure out what my trial and error process looks like, I can hand it to the AI and say, keep on doing this. Do this 10,000 times and tell me when you come up with success. I need to go get a sandwich. Now, the attacker also can guess in that trial and error. They can say, I think it's this way, I think it's that way, I think it's this way. Well, the AI can make that guessing so much more faster and so much more automated. Now, AI is working in favor of the attacker by removing friction, generating quick proof of concepts. And remember, those proof of concepts that it's creating don't have to be right all of the time. They don't have to be right the first time, the second time, or all of the time. They can work on half of the devices out there, and they're winners at that point. Remember, the attacker is going to deploy this attack across a list of any targets that it may have. Are any of these Windows hosts that are unpatched for this particular thing? I want to go attack them. The defender is going to deploy controls against the new attacks, but we got to catch up here. And that's one of the things that happens in EDR is we can catch up. Now, what I say is two things. EDR, for us to protect against new attacks, is helping us because the evolution of the attacks is so fast that we can now do we can now do forward-thinking things, and looking at AI will actually do the generation of the kinds of attacks that we're going to see in the future, and it can prepare for them by casting a wider net on different DLLs or different activities within the system that we can't keep up with from a signature-based. It can look at anomalies on the system. But separately, your EDR on your system, where you're running AI, where you're running OpenClaw at this moment in time, your agents may look at that and go, this thing's getting in my way. I can't do what I want to do. I want to look at all the different files here, and it'll route around this as if it was failure. So the problem that we're running into today, quite frankly, is that there's an arms race going on, and the EDR can help us or it can hurt us. We don't really know which one yet at this point. So I hope you'll join me for the entire presentation.